You might have congested lymphatic system and not even know about it. And I know what you're thinking, how is this even possible? Well, guess what? I've been a functional medicine doctor for over a decade, and I had a congested lymphatic system, and it took me quite a while to put it together before I was like, this is my issue. This is what is going on. So in this video, we're going to talk about the symptoms most commonly associated with lymphatic congestion or stagnation, and why doctors don't talk about it. So if this interests you, make sure you stay to the end, because I know that there's going to be some symptoms that completely surprise you, because it sure the heck surprised me. And the more that I dig into it, the more that I research, the more that I work with individuals, the more that I see it to be very much true. So why is it doctors don't talk about the lymphatic system? Well, there's a couple reasons, and it's not super straightforward. First and foremost, the lymphatic system is talked about in school. The problem though is whenever we talk about the lymphatic system, we're focusing mainly on the big scary C word, cancer. And yes, that absolutely can affect the lymphatic system. However, there's other problems that can arise within the lymphatic system that need to be addressed that there just isn't good testing for. So let's talk about that. What are some of the tests that can be done to show us or tell us whether or not we have a congested lymphatic system? The answer is there's not a lot of great ones, unfortunately. We can look at a CBC, so blood work, a CBC with differential to see, are there any infections? Are there any chronic or acute infections? And what is present? Because remember, the lymphatic system is part of our immune system. So it is going to be part of fighting off whatever we're exposed to, bacterial, viral, parasites, pathogens. It's going to be part of that. But the other part is waste removal. So there's not a good test that shows how well are we removing waste. The other problem is it's not really showing flow. Now, there's no great test. The best one out there currently is called thermography, and we can get what's called full body thermography, where it's measuring the temperature of our body, and it will tell us what are the temperature changes. And so when we have a lot of stagnation, things get really red. They get red hot, and the thermography scans are going to show that. So that is probably the best option right now to look at whether our lymphatic fluid is draining, but the downside is that's not readily available. It's not like you can just go to your doctor's office and they can do a thermography scan on you. You actually got to go to a special clinic that has the thermography scans, that knows how to do it. So that's just not possible for everyone. So that's probably the biggest reason why, lymphatics really isn't talked about. One of the best ways to figure out whether or not somebody has a congested lymphatic system is doing a really good history. When I started to piece everything together for myself and hundreds of other clients that I've worked with over the years, it's literally been piecing everything together over the past, essentially, entire life. Going, okay, what was happening here? What was this? When did this happen? What happened here? What was done? Did you have any surgeries? Because all of these things, including medications, can indicate whether or not our lymphatic fluid is flowing. So one of the problems is when our lymph isn't flowing, because remember, lymphatic system is literally the mirror to our circulatory system. So wherever we have blood supply, we have a lymph supply. And by lymph supply, I mean lymph vessels to help remove the waste product, the waste fluid, which is the lymph fluid, from our cells. And if that's not being removed, all of those toxins and waste products are driving up inflammation. So the more inflammation we have within a part of our body, the more breakdown we're going to have over time. And the breakdown is going to look different for everybody. Just like the reason why lymphatic stagnation or congestion can look different per person. What it was for me could be very different than what it is for you, which could look very different than what it looks like in your sibling or your kid. So just because we share genetic material doesn't mean that we're going to have the exact same symptoms. Now, with that being said, going back to it being waste products, the more inflammation that we have in an area due to waste and toxins sitting there, the more breakdown we're going to have. And the more breakdown we have, the more symptoms and complications and just diagnoses diagnoses that we're going to end up with. And that takes time. So the longer that we have this going on, the more that it builds. And the longer that it builds, the more symptoms that we end up with. And that was me. That was 100% me. I'm pretty positive that I was essentially born with stagnant lymph. And I'll save that for another day as to why I think that. But I had congestion in my lymph from a very young age. And so what I want to do is I'm going to start to talk about some of the symptoms associated with congestion and stagnant lymph, but I also want to break it down into different areas so we can see, I can see how that could look like something else. And maybe, a doctor or a practitioner that you've worked with or are working with maybe didn't put it together. And it doesn't mean that it's the only thing. Please understand that having congested lymph doesn't mean that that's the only thing you have going on. It's just one of the things that could be there. So it's definitely something that has to be addressed, but it doesn't mean it's the only thing. Okay, so let's actually start with the most obvious, what it looks like systemically in our body. So if we have congested lymph in our body, that can look like fluid retention, meaning if you have a swollen arm or a swollen ankle or a swollen leg and you can visibly see fluid, that is absolutely congested lymph, where the fluid isn't draining. That's pretty obvious. Most doctors are going to catch on to that. You're probably going to catch on to that. It can be other things too, like swollen, hard, or even tender lymph nodes in and around like our neck or our groin, maybe even around our armpit or our breast tissue, because that's typically where we're checking most often. And those tend to be the ones that become most reactive when there is an issue. It could also look like things like muscle or joint pain all the time. Or if you wake up in the morning and you're really stiff and achy, that could be a lymphatic thing where because you're not moving while you're sleeping, the lymph isn't moving, because remember, we have to move our body to move our lymph. That could be the reason why you're waking up so stiff and achy. Another thing that can happen is we could end up with skin issues like dry, itchy skin that could potentially look like a rash. Remember, a good chunk of our lymphatics is just below the surface of our skin. And so if we have a lot of waste products, a lot of toxins sitting in there, one of the ways that our body tries to get it out of us is via our skin. So having things like acne and having things like rashes and dry, itchy, scaly skin could very well be a symptom of having congested lymph. And another surprising one is actually cellulite. Now hear me out. Cellulite is not only caused by congested lymph. That is one component. Another component is having an imbalance in hormones, estrogen, progesterone, and also having lower muscle tone, lower muscle mass. And then genetics does play a very small part. Some people are just more likely to develop it. But those other three we can absolutely contribute, or at least control. So lymph, like I said, is part of it. Let's talk about like head and neck, because this was my big thing. If you or your kids have things like swollen tonsils, if they're always swollen, if they're always red, and or if you've had them removed, tonsils removed, adenoids removed, that's a lymphatic issue. And what caused them to become swollen and red and enlarged is a stagnation issue. The question is, was there always an infection? Was there food sensitivity? Was there an allergen? What was happening? Removing them doesn't fix it. So I'll definitely dive into tonsils on another video explaining what causes it, what should we do, what can we look for, and then me, because I don't have them, what do I do? Other things that can happen with congested lymph in the head and neck, chronic sinus infections. If you're always congested, if you always have postnasal drip, that could be a sign. Chronic headaches, very frequent headaches. If you're somebody who wakes up with headaches, they kind of like they're there all the time, it's a low-grade headache, that absolutely could be a lymphatic issue. Your brain's not draining. It could also look like things like chronic fatigue or depression. Those can also be linked to stagnant lymph. And then like brain fog type things. If you're talking and you forget what you're saying, or if you forget names 2 seconds after somebody explains, like introduces himself to you, or if you have post-it notes everywhere. I don't, but if you do, because you got to remind yourself, that could be due to the fact that your lymph is not draining. So we have tons of lymph in our head and neck, but the next place that we have tons of lymph is in our gut, which is no surprise when I say that some of the symptoms we could be experiencing when we have stagnant lymph is coming from our gut. So some of the symptoms that we could end up dealing with when we have congested lymph is bloating. Do you get bloating after a meal? Do you get bloating any time of day? Does bloating happen with your menstrual cycle? So bloating can be a symptom. Do you have constipation? If you're constipated, that's another potential symptom. Or just digestive issues. So if you've been diagnosed with a digestive issue disease, I definitely would consider looking at how your lymphatics is flowing, because lymph and gut are very closely related. There's other things associated with gut that could be due to lymphatic congestion, things like food sensitivities. So if you are sensitive to things like eggs and cheese and random things like, I'm sensitive to everything, I had a food sensitivity test and everything is lit up. I can only eat 5 foods, which guess what? I used to run food sensitivity tests, and I no longer do it because it just tells me that the lymph isn't working and the lymph and gut need better communication. The other thing that can happen is I've been diagnosed with a parasite infection. So parasite infections actually go hand in hand with congested lymph, along with if you're somebody that gets sick very easily, meaning somebody in your workplace can sneeze and you know you're going to get sick, or the kids come home with the sniffles, you're catching it next. That tells me that there's congestion in the lymph, because remember, lymph is part of our immune system that's not clearing things out. So your immune system is ultimately either overreacting or not being able to do its job. It's not being able to actually take care of the infection and clear things out. Now, the last thing that I want to talk about that most people find surprising is more of the hormonal symptoms that can be due to lymphatic stagnation, but they get clumped into other issues, like it's a hormone issue, it's a liver issue. And I'm not saying that it's not hormones and it's not liver, but usually when this is happening, there's also a lymphatic component to it. So one of the symptoms is cold hands and feet. Most of the time people think cold hands and feet is a circulatory issue or a thyroid issue, but it very well could be a lymphatic issue. So cold hands and feet is one. The inability to lose weight despite exercising and dieting and doing all the right things, or you just keep putting weight on and there's absolutely no reason. You've had your thyroid checked, you've had everything checked, you're told everything's fine, everything's normal. Maybe it's a lymphatic issue, because lymph is directly related to gut function, because one of the things it does is it transports fats and fatty acids and fat-soluble vitamins. So if the lymph isn't working, we're not digesting, we're not functioning, which can then result in, weight issues. Another problem could be if you've been diagnosed with estrogen dominance. Estrogen dominance could be due to the fact that your progesterone isn't keeping your estrogen in check. Now hear me out. One of the ways that progesterone circulates in our body is via the lymphatic system. So if our lymph isn't flowing, it's not able to circulate progesterone, which then means progesterone is not keeping your estrogen in check, thereby you ending up with estrogen dominant symptoms. And that list is a whole plethora. You can easily Google estrogen dominant symptoms and you can see if that's part of it. So if you've been diagnosed with anything with estrogen dominance, PCOS is one of them, and we'll be talking about that in just a sec, you gotta look at lymphatics. Another thing that can happen is cyst-like structures. So PCOS, cyst in your breast, that could potentially be due to lymphatics not draining. The other thing is swollen, tender breasts at different parts of your cycle, especially like around ovulation or right before you menstruate. That can also be a lymphatic issue. Remember, we're going back to progesterone not being able to circulate, keeping estrogen in check. And then another very common one is dense breasts. If you've been told you have dense breasts and you have to get mammograms and you have to do all these things regularly because you have dense breasts, I absolutely would be considering, or at least looking into, lymphatic drainage as one of the things to help you make sure that everything's clearing and flowing properly. The last one is chronic fatigue. And I think I mentioned this before, but chronic fatigue and hormones really can go hand in hand. So if you wake up tired, if you crash in the middle of the day, if you constantly need that pick-me-up, I would consider looking at your lymphatic system and see, I wonder, is there some congestion? So looking at all these symptoms, if you're going check, 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 like I did with me, know that it's okay. There's things that you can do at home. Talk with your doctor about it. Bring it up. Always get everything checked out. Make sure if you have any lumps or bumps or anything of concern, go get it checked out. And then when they give you the everything's fine, everything's normal, don't worry about it, make sure you come back here. Make sure you subscribe because I'm going to tell you what are the things that you can do at home to support your lymphatic drainage, your liver drainage, and your gut drainage, because guess what? All three of those play together in order for our body to be functioning properly. I hope you learned something new. Make sure you subscribe, follow for more information, and as always, happy draining.